Magnum TA was poised to be one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling when his career was suddenly and tragically ended on October 14, 1986, due to a serious single-vehicle collision just a few miles from his home. The accident rocked the wrestling world and possibly changed the course of wrestling history. If you're new to this channel, you can check out my latest video on Magnum TA titled Triumph Over Tragedy to get a quick synopsis of his life and career. But the question that remains in the mind of most fans of Magnum TA, Jim Crockett Promotions, and the wrestling world in general is what if that accident never happened? Well, this video is going to endeavor to answer that question. My name is BC Hunter, and I am the host of Wrestling with the 80s. I've brought along my good friend Ted the Hillbilly Heel from the Heel Truth Wrestling Podcast to explore a wrestling world where that accident never occurred and how that affected the overall landscape of professional wrestling. So we're talking, what if Magnum TA never had his car accident, and what would have been the result on the wrestling world? Not just for Magnum, not just for Jim Crockett Promotion, but the wrestling world as a whole is what we're thinking. So this is a topic I wanted to explore with a lifelong wrestling fan and a man who really was there during the 80s and there in North Carolina area when we got the Great American Bash going on. We've got just Flair ripping it up, the Horsemen ripping it up, and a man who loves the heel psychology. But we can't just talk heels. We got to talk about the ultimate baby faces as well. But Ted the Hillbilly Heel from the Heel Truth Podcast, how you doing first off?
I'm doing great. I am happier than a tick on a hound, as we say down here in the South.
This is your sweet spot, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you can give us a rundown. Just I know you've done this before on the Wrestling with the War podcast, but just because I want to be able to display this, but your wrestling history, like I know you started late 70s, but maybe you can kind of take us through just even up to just the end of the 80s, because then we don't care about that stuff after the 80s, right?
No, not too much. Late 70s, ICW, Angelo Poffo, the Macho Man, Leapin' Lanny. Again, guys, if you've never seen if you're a Macho Man fan, go back and find some YouTube videos. They're a little grainy, a lot of them, because some of them look like they've been recorded right off a VHS cassette. But still, just you could see the evolution of the Macho Man that we know and love coming to fruition. Then Mid-Atlantic, Bob Caudle, all that. Then the Georgia Championship Wrestling, Gordon Soley, Buzz Sawyer, Ole Anderson, Mass Superstar, all that. I was there for Black Saturday. I was there the day that Vince McMahon took over my TV screen before Monday Nitro in the simulcast, okay? I saw it that night, okay? I was pissed. That's all I'm going to say. Jim Crockett comes back. Tony Schiavone, David Crockett. I was a little bit reluctant because I wanted Gordon Soley back. I mean, Gordon Soley was this generation who grew up in the Attitude Era and through the 2000s. Everybody talks about Jim Ross. Gordon Soley was my Jim Ross, okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, he was my guy. I got used to Tony Schiavone. We got that Jim Crockett, NWA, WCW through the mid to late 80s there, every Saturday night, even when I was a teenager, even when I was dating, okay? If she wanted to go out on Saturday night, she wasn't getting picked up to 8:30 because from 6:05 to 8:05, I was in front of the TV, okay? That's just the way it was. I mean, we got in the hallway at school, in high school, everybody was flashing the fours. It was just, it was a great time to be a wrestling fan.
That's dedication, my friend. Even telling the woman to, you know what, you're taking a back seat to the Horsemen tonight.
It's I can't help it,
So you had mentioned before that you actually attended one of the events for the Great American Bash in '86.
Yes. It was Kingsport, Tennessee. I don't remember what exactly number it was, but that summer when they were doing the Great American Bash, they had like 14 events. They had skydivers, they had concerts, and everything leading up to it. And I remember I told you the card one time. I just remember, I think it was Flair and Ronnie Garvin in a steel cage. I know the Road Warriors against the Russians in a double Russian chain match. Uh, may have been Magnum and Dusty against Tully and Arn, but it was just great. It was something. A friend of mine, his dad got tickets, and he was like, "You want to go?" Because we all had that. We all had those one or two really good wrestling friends in high school, and he was one of mine. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll go." So it was something else.
The two big things that, besides, obviously David Allen Coe coming and doing a concert with Dusty, but the two big things I think of that summer of '86 are Flair with 14 title defenses over a 2-week period, and then of course the best of 7 with Magnum and Nikita. That was
Yes.
done during the Great American Bash as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what a memorable time to be a wrestling fan. We've both talked about it. I was a WWF fan in '86. You were a JCP fan in '86. Along with we're both checking out the territories and stuff like that. But both of us recall that year as being just so amazing. Just something that I think solidified our wrestling fandom. But yeah, like I lived the whole NWA side through the wrestling magazines, and I still could feel just the fever pitch of the fans just through the magazines and seeing clips like on some different shows that might have came on and all that type of stuff. Like, we didn't have YouTube back then. I would have been just devouring that stuff. If we had pay-per-view that I could have got for those things, I would have been devouring it. But the fact that just through the magazines and seeing the excitement that was going on down in that territory at the time was able to make me a Jim Crockett Promotions fan. And not only that, but a Magnum TA fan, who is the topic that we want to talk about. I mean, coming off the heels of the video that I did on Magnum, but I became a Magnum TA fan through the magazines, if you can believe it. But just there was so much hype around what was happening down there, which leads us to this what if tonight.
So 1985, 1986, Jim Crockett Promotion was my golden era. I mean, WCW 605 Saturday night. Yes, a lot of squash matches, not a lot of main event matches, but just the promos. And everybody pretty much could do promos. Heels, faces, mid-carders, everybody, excelled at it. And I just loved it. It was just a special time for me.
Every wrestling fan who lived through that era always wondered, what if? So let's tackle that topic. Are you ready to go, my friend?
All right. Let's go.
We're just going to pretend that the accident never happened. We're going straight on. We're talking '86. Magnum's just lost the U.S. title to Nikita. We're kind of leaning towards him and Flair getting ready to possibly go at Starcade, although there's been lots of rumors around that, whether he would have actually fought him at Starcade '86 or if he would have fought Nikita and got the U.S. title back, which is many people have talked about that plan as well. And maybe into '87 is when the title change finally happens for the world title. From your memory, do you remember which it was? Was it he was going to be getting the U.S. title back, or was it straight on to Flair for Starcade?
From everything that I remember, it looked like they were building Magnum. Mm-hmm. And Flair has said in interviews, that he came into the hospital and laid the gold belt on him in the bed and was crying and saying that this was supposed to be you. Tony Schiavone has said on his podcast that it was set up for Magnum. And, and I hate to say this, but we've seen it in wrestling so many times in every promotion. You lose upward. Sometimes you lose that mid-card title, and then you work, string some wins, and get up. So it was like he lost it to Nikita, and everything that I think he was getting ready that year at Starcade to go against Flair, because, Flair had already wrestled Dusty and done all these other things. So I think that Magnum was the next choice, because, we know that, they had to flip it on the fly about turning Nikita face. So, I think Nikita would have held on to the U.S. belt, and, maybe even Dusty would have faced Nikita back then, or they might have tried to rise up Brad Armstrong or a Sam Houston or somebody that they may have tried to bring up as another baby face that could have went against him. But I definitely think that Magnum was poised for that Starcade to do that.
Well, and the fact that Nikita was in the main event against Flair in Starrcade makes you think all the more that it was Magnum supposed to be there, because when you watch the build-up to Starrcade right up until Magnum's accident, what you're actually seeing is they even announced that the top two contenders for the title were Dusty Rhodes and Ronnie Garvin. And they weren't going to be the main event. Dusty had already, like you said, had that run. He got the title in '86, but Dusty was starting to wear as far as the world title picture. Plus, he also had that side feud going on with Tully as well, with the TV championship, stuff like that. Arn was involved in that stuff. I think you're right. I think you might have saw Dusty go against the heel Nikita for the U.S. title, America against Russia, that type of thing. And then Magnum finds a way to slot himself into that. I don't see Ronnie Garvin actually getting that Starrcade '86 main event. Of course, the next year he was involved with Flair and winning the title, but it just seemed like that's what they were lining up for. So we're going to go with the theory that in '86, Starrcade '86, Magnum gets the nod and most likely wins the title at Starrcade '86 if they book it correctly. You good with that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we got a champion, a world champion, NWA world champion, Magnum TA, coming out of Starrcade, going into '87. Hot as a firecracker, you could say. Now, a lot of the arguments I heard was Magnum going to be a touring champion? Maybe, maybe not. But you know what? At that point, it didn't seem like the NWA title was a touring championship title anymore anyways, because Flair was pretty much locked into Jim Crockett Promotions.
Yeah. I'm sure he would have done some dates, that they probably would have done a little. And Flair every now and then would still go to Japan, which I think Magnum, with these, even back then in the '80s, that strong Japanese style that they loved, I think he would have thrived over there. They would have loved him, because everybody said, Arn said it a lot, that Magnum was snug.
Yeah, which we love. Hey, we know a guy who went on to have a pretty good career being known as snug too. That's Steve Austin. So I think that's a common thing, right? That makes it believable. And you watch Magnum in that ring for sure. His work was believable. Coming out of Starrcade, you got a couple of options now for Magnum's first opponents, and it's going to be either Nikita Koloff, obviously the man who beat him for the U.S. title, or maybe even his most hated rival. I don't know. I think you got to go with Tully being his most hated rival, but you get Tully Blanchard in the mix. You could have Arn thrown in the mix as well. You can fire Horsemen at him like crazy. My feeling is that you probably would have had somebody like an Arn be his first feud. And then, of course, then you have Flair with the rematches as well. And I could easily see Flair and Magnum exchanging the title back and forth for a little bit just to keep that whole rivalry going. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you would probably get Flair back in the mix. But then, like you said, I definitely you've got to redo another feud with Tully, because, again, I've said it before, the greatest I Quit match ever, less than 15 minutes, is Magnum and Tully Blanchard. If you've never watched it, please watch it. This is how you take somebody's eye out, not like Seth and Rey Mysterio. This is how you put an eye out. Like you said, you revisit the Nikita. You've got so much, stories there with all that. As you go on into '87, Luger comes into the mix as a heel with the Horsemen. That's right. Imagine a Lex Luger Magnum TA match with Luger being the heel.
Yes.
So he had a bunch of opponents lined up for 87 that, I mean, it was picture perfect.
So my big question to you, does Tully Blanchard become a world champion in either 87 or 88 as that feud with Magnum goes on?
Um, I'm biased because I'm a Horseman mark. I would
Mhm.
believe at least Tully would get it once. I'm not saying he would have held it a long time. Um, I could see Tully winning it at least once, even if it was because Jim Crockett was known to change a title on a house show, just something random. And by the time they had taped the TV tape, and it had already changed back to where you just barely mention it. But I could see Tully, especially and this is, I love Arn Anderson,
Mhm.
uh, but Tully was more like Rick as far now. I think Arn is a better promo than Tully, but Tully had the presentation with Tully would wear the suits just like Rick. You know, Tully had the presentation where Arn really wouldn't dress up as much. So I could see them putting the belt uh, on Tully. I really could at least once.
I believe so too. I think you would have saw at least one world title reign for Tully, maybe more, but I think you have multiple options with that. Number one, it's just the fact that him and Magnum had such a hot feud in 85 and into 86, but they did exchange titles. So it wouldn't be an odd thought for Tully to beat Magnum in a world title match. The other thing is, you said it right there. Tully's almost like a Flair clone as far as the way he carried himself as far as the championship. Of course, he's not blonde and whatever, and to be the third best promo in the Horsemen is still a pretty damn good promo, I gotta
Yeah,
say. Um, but he carried himself like a champion, and you always have that possibility of the dissension angle with Tully winning the title, and now he might be the top guy in the Horsemen. It might be a way to get like a little infighting with the Horsemen. Now Arn's caught in the middle between Flair and Tully, and he's got to make a decision. Maybe it's way to get Flair out on his own, that type of thing. You said it as well, Luger coming in. So then you got kind of a split between maybe Luger's taking Flair's side, Tully and Arn are on one side or whatever. So I think it seems natural that he should have got that world title to cause that little friction within the Horsemen as
yeah,
well. And that's another thing I love about 86. The Horsemen are everywhere in 86, and they're getting in feuds with everybody, whether they're faces or heels. I mean, they're battling the Rock and Roll Express, they're battling the Jimmy Garvin, the Russians at one point, they're fighting with them who were clear heels at that point. I love it. I love
yeah.
it. It's all over. It's kind of like to bring modern times, and it's like the bloodline today. But it's just that's a sign that you've got a hot act when they can be on all over that episode, and yet you're not tired of them.
Well, and that was the thing again I loved about '86 because you had the Horsemen against Magnum and Dusty. You had the Horsemen against the Russians, who were also heels. You had the Horsemen against the Road Warriors. You had, like I said, Jimmy Garvin came in, Ronnie Garvin. You had the Horsemen were the central focus, and they branched out to where every week, and again, watch a promo. Watch these promos. They would always set up their next feuds. They would talk about who they were going to fight, but then they would name drop somebody else, you know,
That's right.
and they would name drop, they might be talking about Magnum, but then they would bring in, and even the thing, because Brad Armstrong, you know,
Yep.
everybody talked about what a great worker he was, but he never got over that hump. But listen to the promos where they would name drop Brad Armstrong.
Yep.
So when they beat him, he sounded important, and it made you think, oh man, they beat Brad Armstrong and they were talking about him, so he must be important. So it was just, I don't know, it was just a great time.
I just watched an episode the other night, and I know Brad Armstrong. They say, oh, his one drawback is he wasn't a good promo. Well, I was watching him, and he was doing a promo, and it was involving the Horsemen. And I think just the fact that he was elevated into that whole thing, it upped his promo game. It wasn't a bad promo. And then of course, you had Flair come in and jump him. I mean, you got the top
Yeah,
dog jumping Brad Armstrong. And just the place went nuts because of the fact that Flair's involved. You got, I think Tully jumped him along with it. And all of a sudden he's a made man. He's a star. And I think everybody was just rolling off of that energy in
Yeah.
'86. They were up in their game. If you even compare the promo from Magnum in '85 when he did the first
Yeah.
$1,000 challenge with Flair, still a good promo, face to face with Flair, but he got eaten up a little bit in that promo. To '86, we were talking about before we went on the air. I mean, the dude looks like a stud. He's controlling the promo at that point. Even Flair tried to stop him, and he said, "No, no, 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 we're not finished yet." And he took over that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just everybody upped their game in '86, and it was just amazing to watch.
Well, and Tony Schiavone's talked about Magnum's promos. He said the one thing about Magnum, the way he would look at the camera, it was like he was looking through the TV screen at the audience sitting on their couch, and he was talking directly to them. Just his eye contact, the way it was, made you believe it. Everything that he said is like when he promises you he's going to win, he promised you he's going to do this, you believed it.
It was like he was searing a hole through that camera. Just an
Yeah.
intensity. It's like Austin. Austin was the same way. He just burned a hole
Yeah.
through that camera, and you felt it. It goes back to what Johnny Valentine always said, right? I can't make you believe wrestling's real, but I can make you believe I'm real. And that's the same
Yeah.
thing. You feel like Magnum's real. You feel like a Steve Austin's real. You feel like an Arn Anderson's real. All those guys, right? It's just the way they do things. So just so impressive at that time. So we've got okay. So we feel like we would have probably saw Tully win the championship. I don't think it's going to be Tully transitioning to anybody. I think it's an exchange thing once again. I think you probably would have saw Magnum drop
Yeah.
it to Flair once, and then you have him get it back, and he drops it to Tully once. You might even have another steel cage match, which would have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
I just watched that I Quit match the other night, and it almost brings tears to my eyes to watch just the ending and just how Magnum just does such a good job of being the ultimate baby face, but not losing his cool factor when he just throws that piece of wood down, disgust, and saying, "You're not worth it. You're not worth it, me."
It was a couple weeks ago. Dax Harwood on his podcast was talking about that Magnum and Tully I Quit match, and he was talking about if people would watch that. A lot of people think you have to go 20 to 30 minutes to have a classic match. And he said, in his opinion, and I mean, Dax is one of these that studies a lot and watches a lot of old wrestling. He said, under 15 minutes, it may be the greatest match in wrestling history that's less than 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's no different than I know a lot of people talk about Owen Hart and 1-2-3 Kid had the greatest 5-minute match in history, right? Same
Yeah.
thing, greatest 15-minute match right there. I
Yep.
put it up there, honestly, because of the drama that was involved with it. My favorite match of all time is Austin and Bret from WrestleMania 13 because there's so much
Right.
storytelling within that. And that wasn't
Yeah.
1 hour classic. It was, I don't know, it was 20 something minutes that they went.
Yeah.
And that's only because they had the schmaz afterwards. That's why people think it was longer. But same thing, like that whole match was just built to that moment when Magnum finally at the end, he's just like, I can finally do it. I can just take Tully out. And he's like, nope, I'm not breaking my morals for you. I'm not
Yeah.
turning into you. And it's just, I'm telling you, that's artwork. And that's what's missing a lot of times in wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great baby face, He fought when he had to, but at the end, he kept his code of ethics.
And I'll give one more tip of the hat because we're just still on that match. But even Baby Doll played a big part in that. The picture,
Oh gosh, yeah.
The picture that I have in that Magnum video where it's him with that piece of chair, and she's just got this look of disgust and fear on her face in the cage. It's just, again, just those little things, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, so we're moving along in '87. So we got Magnum and Tully. They dropped the title. We'll say once for Tully, could be twice. I don't know, but it's going to be Magnum that's getting it back. There's no transition here. This is just Magnum just having epic rivalries with his opponents that he's had over the past. So I think obviously the next man that steps up is the one and only Russian Nightmare, Nikita Koloff. I think Nikita stays heel because I think he gets tied up with Dusty for a little while.
Yep.
And the other guy that probably would have got involved with Nikita, I'm thinking is like a Barry Windham. possibly.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think maybe in between Nikita and Tully, you might have Luger come into play, but
yeah.
I don't see Luger getting the world championship. I just see him another
No,
good another good feud. You need to be a worker for that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree. It's when Luger came into the Horsemen. Um, you would have, probably had some good matches with Magnum, but I don't think he would have won. But then again, you get that combination also when they kicked Ole out.
Yes.
Um, you would have some six mans with Ole, Dusty, and Magnum against three of the Horsemen. I mean, imagine that. I
Well,
just,
Ole and Dusty, a little callback there too, eh?
yeah, it would have been some good stuff. But yeah, I definitely think Nikita would have stayed heel because he could have, like I said, Barry Windham was coming in, so you still could have had him against some of these other baby faces. And and like I said, the Horsemen, even though they were heels and the Russians were heels, you could have still had Tully or Arn if Nikita was the U.S. champion going after that. You still could have had some of those matches. You still could have done some things with that until Nikita got to, one of the pay-per-views against Magnum and rekindled that best of seven because the story was already built in.
That's right. So in your opinion, Ted, we're talking probably 87 going into 88. Do you think Nikita gets a run with the world title?
It would have been close, but I mean, if I was booking, because let's see, we were still finishing up the Cold War.
Yep.
So I just said, yeah, I would have at least gave him one run with it just to see how it went, because it wouldn't have hurt anything, I don't think. Even if it was a short reign, I think I would have tried it to see what happened because people were so infuriated with the U.S. title. You still go back and, refurbish the whole thing about Nikita's got the world title. He's taking it back to Moscow. He's, taking it back to the home country, all that kind of stuff. I think it still would have worked at the end of 87, first
Yeah,
of 88.
I think so too. Although people are like, well, Nikita became a babyface in 86, but remember, the only way he became the babyface is you had an amazingly tragic and emotional event where
Yeah.
Nikita could play off of that, and my heart bleeds for Nikita and all that stuff. You had Dusty there that's helping bring this along, but yeah, fans were starting to react to Nikita because you couldn't help it. The guy was just a beast in there, but they could have easily just laid it on thick with the whole anti-Russia stuff.
Yeah.
As you say, I love the idea of him not only taking the U.S. title back to Moscow, maybe he renames it the USSR title or something like that,
Yes. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
threatening to take the world title. I mean, come on.
Like I said, if we're going through 87 and then we get into 88, and then when Barry Windham's heel turn pops after he comes in, you could have some great Barry heel Magnum face matches. I think that would have been great because, Flair, Arn, all of them had said that Barry was one of the best athletes and best in the ring that any of them had ever faced. I mean, Arn has said it so many times when Barry was a face and they were wrestling him. He said it was a night off because
Mhm.
he was just so good.
That's the beauty too. I think as far as the whole Barry Windham storyline, that rolls along the same way as you had it, because you would have possibly had Tully win that world title. Then you got to cool him off, bring him out of that picture because you're bringing Nikita into the fold, or Luger's possibly getting into that fold. So you could still have Luger kicked out of the Horseman the exact same way, except it's because Tully's mad that he's now going after the world title. You then have Luger teaming up with Barry Windham, looking like they're going to win the Crockett Cup, all that good stuff,
Yep.
right? And you do the same kind of heel turn. That's keeping that undercard picture and the tag team scene hot as fire, with that whole angle. And you're prepping Barry now to kind of be the guy that's making the run after Magnum in that case. Or, you could even have Barry go against Nikita a couple of times as
Yep.
champion before that heel turn. So you got a lot going on. You get a Luger going after Nikita as a face Luger, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So now you possibly have a Magnum TA Barry Windham series for the world title.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the big regrets probably of the Jim Crockett era is the fact that Barry never actually won that title off of Flair. And I think in 87, they could have pulled the trigger easy on that.
Yeah. Tony Schiavone has said that many times, that before Barry joined the Horsemen, he should have won it before Ronnie Garvin did.
Yes.
And they should at least give Barry a run with it then. And I think even Flair might have said it too. So it was one of those things that, it's just one of those things that Barry should have definitely won it when he was in his prime.
So now you have 88. You possibly get a run from Barry and then back to Magnum. We're talking multi times for Magnum. And then maybe Mr. Flair slips back in the picture. Maybe Mr. Flair manages to pull one more out of his hat, and you still leave it open for that whole Flair Steamboat series in 89, right? And of course, guys like Muda coming in and stuff like that. I mean, so you still have that ability to have that. And then again, have a Magnum pick it up again going into the 90s. I just the potential here is unlimited for what could have happened.
Well, and the thing that gets me there in that 88 to 89 period also is you've got Sting coming in. So is Sting, when he gets there in that late 80s to early 90s, if Magnum is still there, is Sting, does it take him longer to become that top babyface? Because then you might have some Magnum and Sting tag teams. Sting would probably get over with the younger kids like he did, the little stingers and the face paint and all that. But, how does that dynamic go? And then, me, if I was booking, Sting comes in, he's got all these fans, but then is it really Sting and Flair? Or does then, because Magnum's been such a top face for 3 or 4 years, does Magnum turn heel? And then you get a Sting versus Magnum.
Yeah, and it's kind of the passing of the torch in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something I did consider. Would you? Well, first of all, would Sting actually come in as a face at that point, or would they have him as a heel, like this hot young heel to come in, because you do have such the baby face in Magnum? That's one question. The other question that crosses my mind: does Sting even go to JCP, or is it so congested? Like you think about it, maybe him and Warrior both end up in WWF at that time.
Yeah, and and I've often thought about, if Warrior went to Jim Crockett and Sting goes to WWF, what would that have been done? Because I think Sting was easier to work with. Could he have been the heir apparent to Hogan instead of Warrior? But yeah, you're right. Or even, let's really get into the weeds here.
Mm-hmm.
So Arn and Tully leave to go to WWF. But if Magnum is there as the top babyface, does Sting maybe come in and automatically join the Horsemen?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe him and the Warrior, or Sting and somebody else. So, my mind is just, I could go through so many scenarios, so many Marvel multiverses that, it just blows my mind of the possibilities that could happen if one accident doesn't happen.
I know. Do Tully and Arn leave to go to the WWF, or is it just so hot that that Jim Crockett is able to keep them there?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's where it's like, okay, because Flair has said several times, the big thing with the money, they were doing great because, Jim Cornette's book that he has where he chronicles the Midnight Express, he actually tells the gate receipts and how much they got,
Yep.
So you got to think about the house shows were still doing good. They were still making money, but was it just a mismanagement that hurt Jim Crockett? We know the private jets, and like I said, Flair has said that if they would have stayed, east of the Mississippi and not went to the West Coast as much, it probably would have helped. And then, of course, the UWF purchase that really hurt because there was so much debt that they didn't even realize they had. So, but that's why I'm, like you were saying, if Magnum as that babyface champion could have propelled it even more, could they have made it a couple more years before they had to sell out to Ted Turner and maybe turn the tide on it?
That's true. Do they even buy the UWF at that point?
Yeah,
Because maybe business is so good for the UWF, you get that because they were trying to go national with things. You got to look at so
yeah.
many different things. Does a Hulk Hogan have as long a title reign because fans are realizing that Magnum is what the prototypical babyface champion should be instead of Hogan? You wonder that as well. I mean, I know it's a totally different crowd. It's a New York crowd for
Yeah.
Hogan versus a Southern crowd, but you could see the crossover appeal for Magnum as well with that. I mean, they just his look alone. I mean, they're gonna like him in California, and they're gonna like him in New York. As far as putting him on a billboard and stuff like that. Um, do fans start to realize, you know what, like, yeah, we love Hogan, but we're seeing that Magnum is just as good a babyface, but he can work as well. So does that affect the WWF style?
Yeah, and it may do it, because Flair being a heel, you're not really going to put him on Regis and Kathy Lee, you know,
Yep.
but somebody like Magnum could have a crossover appeal to where you could put him on some kind of, Johnny Carson, Regis, Kathy Lee type show, like they started to do with the crossover stuff with Hogan, you
Yeah.
know? So that would be the advantage of having that baby face, that it could have really turned things around for Jim Crockett Promotions.
Yeah. I mean, do we think of the fact that is it possible that Jim Crockett Promotions can overtake WWF in this battle?
That one, that's the thing. To me, I think Magnum would have been a starting point, as far as that. And like you said, going back and forth with Tully, Nikita, Flair, the only other what if is that really hurt Jim Crockett was that, to me, that UWF purchase.
Yep.
I think if you throw that out and take away that money, I know they were wanting the TV deals, but they already had the Superstation. And to me, instead of the UWF, I would have done like Memphis and Jerry Jarrett and went after the TV affiliates of World Class.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that, because World Class had, as many TV affiliates almost as the Superstation did, that's where I would have focused it instead of the UWF. But, that's a whole nother business thing. But, I mean, it's interesting to think about. I think they definitely could have made a little bit longer run with that, because that was the whole thing with Flair. And let's just throw in a current thing. All the junk in AEW with CM Punk. It's like, okay, so what do we got to do? CM Punk's hurt. CM Punk's doing all this stuff. We got to throw it on Moxley.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in Jim Crockett, that was the thing. It was like, okay, the only baby faces that we really can count on are Dusty and Magnum. Dusty's getting up in age. So when Magnum gets hurt, like I said, we try the babyface run with Nikita, but he still ain't to Magnum's level as far as the fans and everything. So it's like it's sort of limited him to where it's okay, we just got to keep it on Flair,
Yeah.
And basically that's what they did until Steamboat got there. And Sting, they were building Sting and then Steamboat. But again, if Magnum could have been that babyface to do it, the possibilities are endless of what it could have done for Jim Crockett Promotions.
Well, on the other side of it too, really, because people forget Nikita, he got over for a while, but also with everything that went on in his personal life with his wife, that really took his heart
Yeah.
out of the wrestling side. So
Yeah.
really, after '87, you don't really see Nikita too much, and so
No.
he didn't have that transition of somebody to take over for Magnum. They tried Ronnie Garvin with the title, but that was a year too late as far as even trying to attempt that. And really, he just never came off as a legit world champion for that. They should have put the title on Barry Windham. That would have been
Yeah.
their way to go. They should have pulled the trigger on Luger in '88, even though maybe Luger
Yeah.
wasn't your prototypical NWA champion. He was hot at the time, and they just took too long to get on him. And then you finally got to Sting. Sting was the guy, but if
Hmm.
in this alter universe, you have a Magnum TA who's carrying that title. You can keep more heels. Like, I mean, they were just loaded to bear with heels. If you have Tully, Nikita, Luger, Windham, Earn, Flair coming at, think about that murderer's row of
Yeah.
heels that are coming at you, right? So you're selling out arenas one after the other after the other. You're still having Great American Bash. Could you imagine a Great American Bash series with Magnum defending the title against those guys throughout the summer
Well,
and probably exchanging it to two or three of them throughout that summer series, right?
and it was the whole Hogan formula. He had his monster heels,
Yep.
and they had them built up for Hogan. And even though it wasn't the same technique or style, but still, like you said, you had all these legitimate heels going against Magnum over and over again to where, yeah, I think it would have been something incredible.
Yeah, I really do. And then, like you say, you got somebody like a Sting coming in. Let's take a different angle of this. Let's instead of them possibly taking over WWF or anything like that. That's just too hard to determine because we don't know what would have happened if you would have had a Tully and Arn leave, if you would have had a Flair go with them because he's feeling like pushed out of the title scene or something like
Yeah.
that. So maybe you have a four horsemen in the WWF in 1989, which would have been absolutely mind blowing, but still pretty cool to see. But maybe Vince, seeing that Jim Crockett Promotions is coming on strong, maybe he makes a play for the UWF. He buys the UWF just to get rid of some more competition, buys Memphis up, whatever. And then he ends up getting a Sting, getting, I don't know, a Rick Steiner. Maybe the Steiner brothers end up in WWF instead of NWA, which would have been a shame for all the tag team matches we would have missed with those guys.
Yeah.
But you never know. So you could see something like that happening. Maybe Vince makes the ultimate play and says, you know what? I see what the future is asking for. I either got to buy Magnum or I got to buy Sting, one or the other, because I need to replace Hogan. Maybe Warrior just becomes another footnote in history. But could you see possibly Magnum going to the WWF?
Oh, I definitely think he could, because I think he could go up there. Vince would probably make him shave his chest, but other than that, I think he would have been, you know, I think Magnum could have, I think that would be interesting to see what would happen with Magnum up there, because, um, he, like I said, he could still do because even Magnum, even in Jim Crockett, you know, his promos weren't long winded. They were, because when you got up in the because, I know that was something Arn said to him and Tully had to learn that, in Jim Crockett, they could go on for 3 or 4 minutes.
Yep.
But when they had a little vignette promo up there, it was 30 seconds, 45 seconds. You got to get your point across. And Magnum was real good about getting his point across really quick. So I think he would have been fine on the promo. And, I mean, you could see a Jesse the Body and Vince in commentary, or whoever, or Gorilla, or Bobby Heenan really putting it over and selling him or putting him down. So I think that would be fun too.
Yeah, I can easily see, say, a Magnum running right through into about '89 or so when you get Flair with the title, and him and Ricky are having their series, and it's becoming quite obvious that Sting's the next guy. Maybe that's when he makes the jump over to a WWF, and you have him against Hogan, say, at a WrestleMania 6 in 1990 instead of Hogan and Warrior, which then begets you a Magnum TA as the chosen one to take over for Hulk Hogan. And now you got a series of opponents for him, like a Mr. Perfect. You've
Mm,
got a Bret Hart, maybe, who gets a little push up sooner than he did. Just there's so many options. A Rick Rude in WWF,
yeah.
who's now more seasoned, got a better gimmick. A heel Jake the Snake Roberts going against
Yes,
him.
that would be a good one. Yes.
Yeah, you have all these possibilities, and you can now have Magnum. It's kind of like they start to rotate out of the whole steroid era a little sooner, and then you get
Yeah.
Magnum kind of bridging that gap, and you still could end up with a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels becoming believable, because at that point you now have a Magnum who's been, I don't know, on a top run for 5 or 6 years. Now it's time for him to pass the torch a little bit to somebody.
Oh yeah. I mean, could you imagine? Yeah, like you said, a Magnum versus Brett, or a Magnum versus Shawn Michaels. I think that would just be something that we would be talking about today as a great WrestleMania moment.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
You know, or let's say Magnum goes up there and he's there in 92 or 93, or 91, 92, that early 90s. I know this is wrestling with the 80s, but Magnum against the Macho Man,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm thinking that in '89 and how good that would be, right?
Yeah.
King Savage.
And then Flair finally gets tired of Jim Hurt and comes back. Then you've got a built-in story between Flair and Magnum again in the WWF.
Yeah. It's
So
just mind-boggling to think of what could have been. Really is. It really is. But Ted, I mean, I feel bad asking these questions because it just makes you long for the what could have been. And again, I say it turned out all right for Magnum in the end.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
doing good. But I mean, as a wrestling fan, and we wouldn't be a wrestling fan if we didn't fantasy book a little bit. And
Oh yeah.
it, in your heart of hearts, if in your heart of hearts, if you had to guess, what would have happened if Magnum didn't get in that accident? What, from the timeline from '86, let's say, to end of '89? What do you see? Where do you see Magnum's career go?
E- Everything we've talked about, and there's been a lot of what ifs throughout history, but this is one of those that I think is really and I'm not comparing it in the same light. Okay. So please don't tweet this or say this. But when you have a special talent, so we say, and again, I'm not comparing Magnum to JFK,
Yeah,
but we say, if JFK doesn't get assassinated, what happens to America? I am saying that I think Magnum was such a talent. And even though I'm a heel guy and he was a face, which I think he would have made a great heel when he did finally turn,
yeah,
um, I think Magnum was such a great talent that it is definitely one of those pivotal moments in wrestling history that if that accident doesn't happen, some of the things that we're talking about today never did occur. We've got that Marvel multiverse, change in time, fixing the past, future, all that kind of stuff. I think he was that great a talent that some things were happening. The only thing in wrestling that to me would compare close to Magnum is if I would have started a podcast in my 40s around 2013 when they first started. That would have been the only thing that would have been more revolutionary. But other than that, I mean, it was one of those pivotal moments.
I agree with you. Or if I had jumped on YouTube much sooner and not been afraid to get on that. I love it, Ted. I have to agree. For me, the way I see it going, I just see him getting that title at Starcade '86, and it just catching fire from there for JCP. I see an '87 full of Flair rematches, possibly back and forth titles. I see Tully getting the title run. I think maybe Nikita, if you go heavy handed with that whole pro Russia angle, I think they
Yeah,
get one
yeah.
one run of him. By '89, you've got, well, by '88, he's got the issues with his wife and stuff like that. So I think the whole Nikita thing would have went the same way, which would have been actually not bad timing because the whole Glasnost thing and the Cold War ending,
Yeah,
the Russia
yeah,
thing wasn't going to last for long. So Nikita was going to be faced no matter what at some point. Maybe Dusty's able to retire a bit sooner, as far as not be up on the top rung of that because you have Magnum there. I think you see an 88 that's got a Luger challenging. You got
yeah,
a Barry Windham possibly winning that title as well. I think by end of 88 going into 89, you might have a heel run from Magnum,
yep,
which maybe leads to either a babyface Flair getting that title, or you get Ricky Steamboat come in and get that title or something like that, which leads to your Flair Steamboat situation. And then the question becomes, does he make the jump to WWF? I don't know. I
right.
think you're so hot at that point that JCP was able to hang on to a lot of these guys that they wouldn't have normally hung on to.
Yeah,
I think he sticks around. I think he sticks
you
around for a
could,
while,
very good.
and then maybe
Yeah,
goes up a little bit later.
yeah. I mean, and that's the whole thing is it's just the possibilities are endless with the fantasy booking with this. And again, this is one to me more than anyone else that I think about that what if.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to ask the listeners and the viewers themselves to chime in on this because this is a hot topic. So if you haven't, first of all, had a chance to subscribe to the channel, make sure you do so. Subscribe because we're planning on putting on lots of great content like this, these what if scenarios, the spotlights, all that good stuff. But also leave your comments down below. What do you think happens? How does this play out? We want to hear. We want to maybe at some point we get some folks on to do some of this panel stuff as well. But let us know what you think would have happened. What if Magnum TA didn't have that accident? What happens to the wrestling world going forward? Does it even look the way it does now in 2023 if we had that run for that man? Ted, I really appreciate you coming on here and doing this. Of course, everybody, the Heel Truth. Go listen to the Heel Truth on any of your favorite podcasting apps, anywhere as you can find it. It's the best breakdown of heel psychology you can get in all of the podcasting industry this side of Arn Anderson. I'm going to say that. I'll give Arn some props.
I'll give Arn. Yeah.
All right, Ted, thank you very much. Really appreciate this. And looking forward to our next topic because I'm sure you're going to be a returning guest.
All right. I appreciate it.